Welcome to the debate. I'm your host at PTV WORLD. Welcome to the show. In today's episode, we are going to be taking a look at two very important stories. This show is going to focus on a lot of these things and issues that have been going on in the country, of course. First is with reference to what is going on in Russia. We understand that the situation has been evolving for a while now, and we have been covering it and talking about the different angles related to it as well. An interesting aspect that has now come up is Pakistan's role in this regard, and how is it going to develop in the future days and months. Pakistan is potentially going to play a role as a mediator between Ukraine and Russia. This has been discussed between a telephonic conversation between Prime Minister Imran Khan and the EU President, and they discussed about whether or not this is a possibility and how Pakistan can actually play a role in this regard. Pakistan, of course, has friendly ties with Ukraine and Russia, and Prime Minister Imran Khan has stressed the need for peace. He's always talked about Pakistan partnering for peace, and it's an initiative that Pakistan can take forward, something that Fawad Chaudhry has also spoken about and said it is a big initiative that has been discussed, and Prime Minister will now take practical steps for it. What those practical steps may be still remains to be seen, and we'll explore further in today's show exactly what role Pakistan can play, what sort of challenges it's going to face in this particular role, and then of course the kind of measures that can be taken in this regard. For our second segment of today's show, we will be taking a look at the situation in India and the effect of the Ukrainian crisis on India as well. We understand that about 60 to 70% of the defense equipment that is being currently used in India is of Russian origin, and India has had a lot of dependence on the Russian equipment. And so, of course, this is something that is going to impact India a lot. There are huge sanctions on Russia at the moment, and how it's going to develop in terms of procurement of more such systems and equipment that India has planning and payments that it has to pay to Russia. We'll take a look further and see what are the next steps for India. We understand high-level meetings have been done in this regard as well, and we need to see and moving forward how exactly India, perhaps if it wants to move towards self-reliance or not, and what options has it on its table. We're also going to be taking a look at the fact that India is in a precarious position now in terms of its foreign and relations with Russia, Ukraine and the US. It has abstained again from voting against Russia in the UN General Assembly. What sort of an impact that is going to have on Russia-India relations and India's relations with other countries as well is going to be under discussion in our second segment. Let me introduce our guests for today's show. In the studio, we have with us, of course, Raj Faisal, and we've also been joined by former Ambassador Mr. Nasir Ali Khan, who's going to stay with us on both the segments today. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us in the show today. I'll start with you, Mr. Nasir. When we look at the situation moving around in terms of how it's evolving in the world, the Russian crisis, of course, paints a huge picture, and its impact is far-reaching in terms of all of the different countries in the world. Pakistan has offered to play an important role as a mediator. We also understand that Pakistan had also gone to Russia during this time as well. And of course, there was a bilateral relationship and a working visit. But the fact that Pakistan now can actually play a role with regards to the Ukrainian crisis puts into question what sort of a position does Pakistan really have with both Ukraine and Russia, and whether or not it is going to have impact as a mediator.
Well, one thing is for certain that this conflict, as most other conflicts, are finally going to be decided through diplomacy and through negotiations. Now, as far as the mediation efforts are concerned, our Prime Minister offered to play a role, and the President of the European Council, Mr. Charles Michel, was receptive to the idea. But the details of this, first of all, have not been worked out. And the most important thing, of course, is whether both sides would agree to this. As far as mediation is concerned, there are two very important things. Although Pakistan is not a neighbor in this conflict, and neither does it have very high stakes in it, but if it is considered to be neutral, and if it is considered to be fair, then Pakistan can easily play a role. What we need is to have neutral people. Today, the talks that are going on in Belarus. The third round of talks is about to come about. But the fact is that Ukraine is there out of a certain compulsion and a certain desperation. Otherwise, Ukraine perceives Belarus as a military ally of Russia. More than 30,000 troops are in the Belarus. There are missiles there. And so, you know, they had incursions from that border. But for the sake of humanitarian assistance, the talks mostly are centering on creating corridors from the cities for the refugees, for the affected people, for affected civilians to go out. Now, the sticking point is that Russia seems to offer corridors for people to actually enter Russia. But the Ukrainians do not agree to this. However, when we talk about both sides being fair, a mediator has to show that they are conscious of problems that have been there for a long time from both sides. Now, I will try and go into details of this later if you give me the opportunity.
Yes, Anna.
Right. Mr. Nasser, another important aspect, of course, is the fact that Pakistan is also just recently developing and warming up more to Russia as well, and we want Russian markets to be opened up as well. And that, of course, means that perhaps, like you said earlier, that maybe Pakistan does not have high stakes in this issue, but doesn't that count as Pakistan having high stakes? How will it move forward in terms of being able to have an objective and neutral stance that is essential for a mediator? When, of course, when we're moving forward, we want both the countries to be happy, of course, Ukraine and Russia.
Whether it is
but because
in terms of trade or whether it is our military ties with Russia, are far smaller than our relations, economic relations with the EU and with the United States of America. However, the fact that we are closely working with China, and China is increasingly growing closer to Russia, gives a greater importance in our relations with Russia. And after that, one of our main concerns, immediate concerns, is that of Afghanistan. And in terms of our regional security and our regional concerns, we have a convergence of views with Russia. And our triad, which includes Russia and China, gives it an enhanced importance. But apart from that, I think, like India next door, for instance, to some extent, Pakistan has to follow a sort of balancing act between the two, and it will have to explain certain things to the Western world also.
Right, and this, of course, is an important aspect to look at, Faisal, because, of course, when we talk about the China aspect itself as well, and Russia and China also warming up with each other, doesn't that sort of tilt Pakistan's position a little bit towards Russia and China? Will Ukraine, as Mr. Nasser earlier was saying, it's important for both parties to even agree for the mediator to play its role. Will Ukraine perhaps be happy for Pakistan playing such a role?
Sana, your voice wasn't clear, but I could understand that you were talking about the Ukraine's relations with China as well. If we look at, you know, the recent, I think a couple of days ago, even Foreign Minister of China, he was interested
with regards to,
you know, playing a role in terms of mediation, because, of course, we know that since January 2022, since President Xi met with President Putin in Beijing, it was being considered as that China and Russia, they are ever more closer to each other. And if we look at you know, China's trade, bilateral trade with Ukraine, of course they are having a significant trade between them. So both of them countries, they have very good relations with China, and they are very well placed to mediate sort of you know, the conflict between them. Same goes out for Pakistan as well. Pakistan, why I say that it can play a key role in this conflict, the only reason is that if we look at you know, Prime Minister Imran Khan's speeches since UNGA, he has always maintained that he believes in multilateralism. He does not want to take any sides. He does not want to be you know, part of any military blocs or anything like that. He wants to you know, extend his support for the peace rather than the conflict. So if there is a step forward which is being made to restore peace in any of the regions of the world, of course he will be available. And if he has been contacted by the President of EU, then it shows that they can understand that right now Prime Minister Imran Khan having good relations with China, having good relations with President Putin as well, and the biggest evidence is that he has visited President Putin while the conflict was going on, and even over there he maintained that he wants to be he believes in multilateralism. He believes that if there are conflicts, then the conflicts should only be resolved on the table of the talks rather than in the battlefields. So to me, I think whatever is available with Prime Minister
right,
Imran Khan,
and Faisal,
Imran Khan would be seeking sort of a mediation.
Yep. All right, Faisal, with regards to what I had asked earlier, I wanted to ask exactly what sort of a role Pakistan can play in terms of mediator for both parties to be able to agree on that as well. Like you said, that it's important that people understand that Pakistan has always been neutral and always talked about peace and dialogue. But is that really clear to Russia and Ukraine as well, especially Ukraine? Because, of course, as you mentioned, we have visited Russia as well recently, and we have, of course, a very long relationship with China. But for us to be able to play that role, it needs to be clear to Ukraine and world powers as well. Mr. Nasir, what do you think?
Yes, the most important thing for a mediator is to be able to highlight the problems on both sides in order to gain confidence of both parties and in order to be fair. Now, if you go back to 1997, there are so many people within the United States who have been warning against the eastward expansion of NATO. These people include Henry Kissinger, they include people like Stephen Cohen, they include people like John Mearsheimer, and several ambassadors of the US who have been in Russia. They have all warned against the expansion eastward of NATO. So despite all this, it seems that in stages, expansion continues to occur. Now, the important thing is when you have two nuclear-powered adversaries, a conflict between them can occur at a lower level. For instance, India and Pakistan are nuclear-armed, but they have had a conflict in Siachen, in Kargil, in Sir Creek, in several places, which has not really escalated because it doesn't pose an existential threat. If, God forbid, India were to attack a major city in Pakistan, then Pakistan will definitely retaliate with all the power that it has. Similarly, if you look at the situation in the Ukraine, many people, many analysts, many politicians, many people have pointed out that Ukraine is an existential, if you move NATO forces into Ukraine, Russia will consider it an existential threat. This is not something that was just said by the Russians, that this is our red line. Georgia, Ukraine were red lines where it would pose an existential threat to Russia. Then it would do whatever it is in their power to do. On the other side, as far as the Russian intentions are concerned, there are very important factors both in terms of defense as well as in terms of the economy. You see, as far as the economy is concerned, Russia relies very, very heavily on exporting energy to Europe. Now, its main export and main income comes from exporting gas and oil to Europe. Lately, in the Ukraine, they have discovered major deposits of oil and gas. One is near the Donbass region, almost adjacent to it. One is a little west. And then the third deposit, interestingly, is in the seas in Crimea. You see, you have certain territorial waters, and then you have an economic zone where you can exploit these resources. So these things pose a threat. If these resources are developed, this gas can start to go into Europe. And not only would it be a strategic weakening of Russia, but also an economic blow to the Russians. So from a strategic point of view, if they were able
to...
Right,
so Mr. Nasir, what you're basically saying is that this move, and the move with reference to Crimea as well, is basically because of these economic considerations. The ulterior motive was that. Is that what you're saying?
Well, firstly, it was the existential threat, because I didn't come to the part where Russia's defenses can be severely affected. When the Soviet Union was in place, the Soviet Union had a large buffer. Firstly, the Warsaw Pact countries, and then, of course, Belarus and Ukraine were major buffers to an attack on Moscow, let's say. There is this large plain that exists from the northwest all the way to the Ural Mountains, which is a kind of difficult terrain to defend. And as a result, you need to have a buffer in terms of the defenses, military defenses. Now, after the breakup of the Soviet Union, this defense on the northwest was severely weakened. And if Russia manages today to control Ukraine, then there is a much larger and much wider buffer as far as an attack, potential attack on the plains is concerned. So that is the defense aspect of it. But these are, what I'm trying to say is, there are interests on both sides, and there are mistakes that people have made on both sides. I mean, for example, if you look at Russia, to be fair, as far as a sovereign country is concerned, if you have entered that sovereign country, no matter at what pretext, it is going to be a problem in terms of international law. Similarly, I was trying to tell you how the United States has continued to press eastward, which is, in the opinion of many people, in terms of US foreign policy, in actual fact, a foolish thing to do. The reason being that their prime competitor on a global scale is today China. And if they were able to have Russia on their side, if they were able to have friendly terms with Russia, then they could expect another bulwark against the expansion of China. But this kind of pressure has pushed Russia into the orbit of China, and therefore it has become increasingly difficult. The other aspect is, because China is your prime competitor, the focus of the United States should be towards the Asian side, the pivot towards Asia. And Europe should be less important to them. But continuing to have NATO and continuing to have the expansion, it not only keeps them busier there and putting more resources there, but it annoys a potential ally, you see.
Yeah, Sana, if you could allow me, I just wanted to add something.
Of course. Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Nasir, for that detailed analysis. Yes, Faisal, please add to that. But I just also want to add, because of all of this is what Mr. Nasir has said, could you also add, when you're talking, how does then Pakistan will be able to, or for that matter, any country would be able to mediate between this issue? Because is this even something that countries that are involved in this crisis even looking for? Perhaps Russia, is it even looking for this solution? Because considering everything, it seems that it is moving forward in terms of its own interests.
Yes, Sana, first of all, let me tell you, Ambassador Nasir would be with us for the whole program. And yes, about solution, if we look at the solution, we need to look at the parties into it. What do they want? If we look at obviously Russia, what Russia wants in Ukraine. Russia wants obviously the eastern side of Ukraine, which is widely called as Donbas area. It is right above on Crimea. And what Russia wants is, it wants that area to remain a free, independent state, as an independent state, no involvement of Ukraine in that. Number two, what they want is, they want in Ukraine, they want a government which is an sort of independent government, and not aligned with the European Union, or not aligned with the NATO, not aligned with the Western countries. This is what they want. But if we look at Ukraine, of course we need to, if we want to have them on the table for negotiations, then of course we need to know as well that what do they want. Of course, they will be looking for punishment for Russia,
exactly.
looking for
yes.
They would be seeking justice, because they can themselves say that we are at a side where we were bashed and we want justice for that, and we were doing just all politics with the Western countries, and it had nothing to do with Russia. This is what they can claim if they want to. But if we talk about rest of the countries, there are more stakeholders. Whoever wants to get into mediation, that country needs to be aware that it's not only about Russia or Ukraine. There are more stakeholders, whether the terms which are on the table for mediation, they are acceptable to the other stakeholders or not. That is where the things would matter the most.
All right. Absolutely, Faisal, you're so right that is going to be the bigger question here. We are almost out of time for this segment, and we also have both our guests for the next segment online with us as well. So let me just welcome Mr. Fahad Masood, who's a security analyst in the debate, and also Mr. Shalinder Singh, who's an international defense strategic analyst. Thank you very much for joining us in the debate. Our second segment is going to focus on the impact that this entire crisis that we're earlier talking about is going to have on India, with reference to also its strategic and diplomatic ties with different countries, and then of course its defense equipment and its dependence on Russia as well. I'll start with you, Mr. Shalinder Singh. Considering both the areas, the diplomatic and strategic front and the defense front as well, do you think that India at this moment today, with reference to the Ukrainian crisis, is in a precarious situation and is finding it hard to balance?
Oh yes, it is. It is. It's a very major responsibility, diplomatically, internationally, strategically, defense-wise also. India is in a very, very precarious situation where we need to balance. Wars will come, wars will go. Both countries will do what they want to. We have to see our interest, which should be actually the prime consideration for any one industry, or any one of the countries. I can only tell you one thing. This war is not between Ukraine and Russia. It's an economic war at the world level. Whosoever may say anything, but there is why? Because the US, right now for last few days, we find that the US is only asking other countries to create a mahal. They want to create an environment where the talks can take place. Whether the talks will take place or not, it is not debatable, because talks has to take place. There's no other way out. No war can stop otherwise. You can't have, the Ukraine. I respect Russian concerns. There's no problem. But that doesn't give you a right to take over a country. That is also to be seen at the world level. Because especially as Indians, if this is the trend to be accepted, then we have a bigger problem. We have somebody in our neighborhood who wants to do the same. He'll get encouraged. I think overall, Indian lesson should be, have such a deterrence in your army that somebody will think twice. Have that diplomatic offensive, diplomatic favorable situation and environment world over, where everybody will stand with you and somebody will get isolated. So we have strategic interest in this, because again, India and China are competitors on economic front. That also needs to be seen. So overall, if I have to summarize, I can only tell you.
But Mr. Shalinder Singh, do you think India will be faced with such a situation where it has to really choose a side? Because of course, as things evolve, there may perhaps be such a junction where you'll have to call out somebody with regards to their measures. Do you think India will be able to risk that at any moment in time?
I think this is the biggest challenge which India has. There is no denying that. But at the same time, if we have been able to have a stand for last few months, and especially in the last 13 days, I think we should be able to sail through, because somebody has said it well, that if you talk is all silver, but if you keep silent is gold. Sometimes this gold will be very, very paid.
I just wanted to ask Fahad about, of course, it is a very tricky situation for India developing right now, because we know that 70 to 80% of their procurements, military procurements, they've been made from Russia in past. And could we say, I mean, how I understand it, that you always make your, defense doctrines on the basis of the equipment you have, and if there is a hindrance, India getting their equipment procured from Russia in coming future, would they be having whole of the systems of doctrine changed to adopt the new systems? Number one. Number two, obviously we know that yesterday there was a high level meeting between Raksha Mantri, Defense Minister of India, with all of the three chiefs of the forces. Do you think that it is an alarming situation for India, and how can India get out of this situation? Because if we look at the arms, be it naval or air force or the army, of course all of them, they are sort of coming from Russia, and if they want to change it, of course they would be changing all of the doctrines as well.
Yes, thank you for that question. So first and foremost, the first questions first, critical to understand buying military hardware and maintaining military hardware are two different domains. Just like buying a car and sustaining a car is a different domain, the dependency of the Indian military, may it be Army, Air Force or Navy, with the Russians has been coming along for a very long time. The recent switch or transit from Russian to American military hardware, being specific C-17s to C-130s, Juliets to Chinooks and all that, C-17 Globemasters within the Indian Air Force and the Mobility Command. So it is crucial to see that this transition had started. But once again, it is, as mentioned by India Today or the Indian Express, about 85%, still 85% of the military hardware is Russian. Talk of the Indian Air Force, you have the Su-30s, the MiG-29s, the MiG-21s. You go over to the Indian Navy, you have one nuclear class submarine which is under lease, the Ka-31. Helicopters and so much. T-90 MBT is also a Russian platform. So they have huge dependency there. To switch focus or switch sides from Russia to America will be a very challenging domain, and this, I believe, was the core point under discussion in yesterday's meet. It is important for them to sustain, because the shift in the world has started. It started some time back, but this move, which has brought the militaries of the world, initially Russia and Ukraine, and now Russia against NATO, probably it's not a face-to-face confrontation, but at the back burner of Ukraine is the NATO countries, may it be empowering them with air warfare domain or military hardware on the ground. So India is in a very tight fix, as it's called, between the devil and the deep blue sea. So they can't really go any place right now, because and as our colleague from India specifically said, silence is golden. Right now, that is exactly what they're trying to do. But they will have to choose sides sooner than later. Because this transition which has started has not completed, and if something comes up from the LAC, specifically China, then it's going to be a very difficult situation
this is where,
for India on a
Fahad, this is where I wanted to go towards. I wanted to go towards Ambassador Nasir on it, because right now, if we look at line of actual control, of course there is a standstill. both the forces, one from China, one from India, they are face to face, they are facing off each other. And if we look at Eastern Ladakh, if we look at Arunachal Pradesh, of course, things are going very bad out there. Because 14 times they had talks, and all of them talks, they were a failure. Right now, Ambassador Nasser, what would you say about the people, the powerful people in New Delhi sitting? What would they be thinking about, that if there is a conflict, what would happen to them?
Well, there are two dilemmas that India faces at the moment. Back in about 23 years ago, Mr. Vajpayee and Mr. Clinton decided on having a strategic partnership to be able to counter the influence of China. But as you can see, in these 23 years, the situation of the Indian military has not changed drastically vis-a-vis the dependence on Russian arms.
True.
Today, 96% of their tanks are either T-90s or T-72s. 70% of their aircraft are Russian aircraft. The one aircraft carrier that they have was actually a refurbished Russian ship or Russian vessel, which actually took about 5 years over its original promised period to deliver, which ran into overruns from 900 million, it ended up being $2.3 billion worth. So what I'm trying to say is that despite the fact that 23 years ago, the United States and India decided to go into a strategic partnership, and India did decide to buy arms from other countries, today, despite the fact that India in the last 10 years has reduced its military spending by about 30%, even today, it buys 49% of its armaments from Russia. The country number 2 is France, which is about 18%. And then there's Israel at number 3%, number 3 at about 13%. And the Americans come 4th. So it is extremely difficult, as Squadron Leader Saab said, that the important thing is the equipment that you have, that has to be maintained. And they have had serious issues even with that. The Indian Air Force, for instance, no longer wants to have Sukhoi aircraft because their parts were substandard, their services were sloppy. So this is one dilemma, that it is going to take extremely long for India to shift. India is trying to even invite foreign direct investment to have more indigenous production of armaments, and they are also corporatizing defense supplies within India, inviting foreign investment in that. But all that having been said, this will take a very long time to actually come to fruition. So where is the other dilemma? The other dilemma is...
Right, and Mr. Nasser, this is what I want to talk about from Mr. Shalinder Singh as well, because this of course is another aspect of the dilemma that India is currently facing right now. Firstly, with regards to of course the issue of sustaining and maintaining the equipment, what sort of a plan is there for that? Because of course we've seen what has happened in the past, as has been pointed out. Is there a measure or a plan to take care of it with regards to that? Secondly, there are of course two things at hand right now. Perhaps the more immediate consequence of the sanctions on Russia with reference to procurements of different equipment that are still ongoing and payments are ongoing. That of course is going to have a huge impact on the exchange rate and whether or not India will be able to, or Russia and India both will be able to accept that and moving forward. Will that go towards barter deals or any other alternative, or will it go ahead as it is? And thirdly, what are the moves in terms of moving towards more self-reliant equipment rather than such a huge reliance on Russia?
I'll agree with both the panelists when they bring out the data. That data is correct. I have nothing to dispute on that. But at the same time, I can only tell you one thing. What decisions we take today is not going to impact us tomorrow. It is going to impact us another 20 years. Now, this is exactly what had happened. What had happened 20 years back is continuing and impacting us now. One choice is don't correct it, continue. I think India has chosen that, yes, let us correct it and correct it for good. So if we are expecting that there is going to be a very, very dramatic shift, it will not come in next 5 years also. It may not come in next 10 years. Yes, I will agree with Sanaji when she says indigenization. World over, any country who has gone for defense indigenization has become a power. We are realizing it a little late. For whatever reasons, we can keep blaming anybody, but I will blame myself first, that we are to be blamed. Why did we see it? What we can see today. Our strategy should have got corrected maybe 20, 30 years back, because we can't keep saying that we are a new nation. We are not. We are a stable nation. We are aspiring to be a power. And how do you become a power? You don't become a power by importing defense. You just why US is the power in NATO, not other countries, because of the defense, because of the economy. There comes one point again that along with the defense is the economic interest and economic development. We have seen a beautiful example of China that from 1988 till now, where have they come? They've suddenly become too big for the world to handle. I think we are now in the right direction. Indigenization is your ultimate solution. Maybe it will be a very slow, it will take time, but that is your ultimate solution if you want to survive in this world of independence, of maybe
right.
being
And Shalinder Singh, I agree with that, of course. But what you said is that there needs to be correction and corrective measures taking place. And so when we talk about that, do you think that certain corrective measures, yes, Faisal, we'll come to that. Let me just finish with Mr. Shalinder Singh. With reference to the corrective measures that we're talking about, do you think that they've already been taken? As you're saying that it's slow, but it's there and it's been done. What are those steps that have been taken?
Oh, it's quite visible. It is quite visible. We are no more into a non-aligned mode. We are in a mode of alignment that suits us, suits our economy, suits our defense, suits our requirement. We are able to, a very beautiful example I can give you is what? S-400. Somebody said, don't take it. We will not allow you to take it. We still went ahead with that. There are times when harsh decisions have to be taken for whether somebody likes it or not. Coming to the reservations which we are doing in defense procurement for indigenous products. There's a list which is coming out. It's on the net. You can see it. There are 80 items which we are listing that is exclusively only for Skill India, that is made in India. I will give you another example. We have been dependent on Russian artillery. We have started doing our own. Why? Yeah. There were talks that it might be little substandard. So what? Until you reach that stage of substandard,
Colonel Shalendra. Yeah, Colonel Shalendra, if you could allow me, please. Sir, you have mentioned that you are taking sides. Fair enough. But if we talk about, you talking about having all of these problems and a dilemma which is being faced by India right now, of course, India is facing a dilemma, and procurements from Russia, they are hindered. And I just wanted to know, you did talk about the, indigenous production of the military equipment. Right now, the problems you are facing in the region, do you not think that rather than, going towards indigenous procurements or indigenous, having your own production within India, you should be having an indigenous political solution to your problems as well, indigenous foreign policy, because if you are taking sides, which is apparent that you are, then it would be a problem for you in coming future. Because if we look at today's India, it aligns itself politically with the Western powers, but when it comes to its military needs, they are being catered by Russia. Don't you think that you have to have an indigenous political solution to all of the problems India is facing today, sir?
In fact, today's government is claiming, and rightly so, they are claiming that it is only in last 5 years or 10 years that we have started correcting ourselves. We are realizing our mistakes or maybe our handicaps, and we are trying to overcome that. Ultimately, when you say political, anything which we do politically will affect our defense also. There's no denying this. Strategically, what international relations we will have a direct impact on the technology transfer and other things, if at all we have to. Our Tejas is going abroad. Why? Our BrahMos is going abroad. Why? These are two small examples I'm giving you that you will see. Oh, for that matter, I'll now even say that we started launching, satellites for others, cheapest in the world. Why? This is how you realize that indigenization will be profitable also as a strategy for times to come. I will again repeat, it is slow because when it comes to defense sector, technology transfer is the biggest challenge. We are not able to have a kind of breakthrough with the Western countries. For what reason? Because of technology transfer. They don't do it so easily. We can't give up whatever we have with Russia for simple reason. There is an alternate. So I don't think there is a dilemma. It is a maturity on the part of my country and the government that we have started balancing things out for our benefit.
Right. Fahad, with reference to the dilemma part, please just also clarify whether or not there is a dilemma for India or not at the moment. And also a question where I think we've missed it with reference to the kind of impact that the sanctions on Russia is going to have on the ongoing or future deals that India has in terms of its equipment with Russia, in terms of the exchange rate, in terms of whether or not there will be an alternative option. How huge will that impact actually be? And thirdly, you said something earlier about India will have to take sides. We've seen there's so many instances around the world where there are countries who are able to, as India has been for a while now, for example, abstain from condemning Russia outrightly, have had some sort of a neutral stance on issues. Is that not a possibility for India as well with regards to Ukraine?
Under the present state, it's a catch-22 for India right now. The last question first, India will have to take sides for one reason only. It is a globalized world. Without taking sides, without becoming a part of a bloc, it is impossible to strive, grow economically, or be politically or security-wise a stable country. Where or how the numbers go, I was going through the newspaper about $9 billion worth of hardware is still supposed to come in from Russia to India, maybe in the form of the remnant S-400s or other platforms which have already been dealt with. So it is a challenging situation where India finds itself right now. In the Committee of Nations, regional security is the only way to generate security, peace, and in turn prosperity. Regional security relates to, in our context, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan as well, China in the north, and the Southeast Asian region, may it be the Taiwan Strait, as we call the Asian pivot. So India has to make, and I would agree with our friend from India right now that they have started to make amends. But the effect will take its due course, due time. It will happen later than sooner because without question, if we look at the big picture of things, there is a block regeneration taking place or realignment taking place. If you look at the Ukraine-Russian situation, the NATO or the West is on one side, there are, and China, Russia, with the non-aligned or relatively quiet Pakistan and India on one side. So it is going to be challenging for all three military arms, Army, Air Force and Navy, to sustain, considering economics and war is a very expensive predicament. Military hardware to sustain and maintain is an expensive way of living, but there is no two ways about it. If you want a regional or national security, military parity within the region is a prerequisite.
Yeah. I think Sana.
Right. We're almost out of time for this segment. So, Mr. Nasir, any last thoughts? Yes, Faisal.
Yes, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the second dilemma, which is the fact that you know, the threat that India poses that China poses in the north at the LAC. They already have installed their S-400 missile system, and India has bought a total of 5 systems for which it has to pay. Now, under the current circumstances, with all the sanctions, it will be extremely difficult for this deal to go through, and because this problem on the LAC is of an immediate nature, this is the second dilemma, because you see, people generally say that Russia has about $630 billion of foreign exchange reserves. Well, the fact is that it is almost impossible to actually use these reserves, and for someone who wants to pay Russia for something, it is almost impossible to make those payments. The actual reserves of Russia, which are primarily
all right. Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Nasir, but we're almost out of time. I've been told that Mr. Shailendra Singh wants to add a quick comment before we conclude.
Yeah.
I can only tell you one thing. There is not going to be a problem on payments, because world countries have got this capacity and capability that we will be able to deal with each other, maybe on a mutual currency basis or whatever. You see, these are challenges. Nasir sir, I can only tell you one thing. Challenges are for US and Russia also.
All right, good to know. Point taken, Mr. Shailendra Singh. Good to know. Thank you very much for being a part of the debate. Unfortunately, we're really out of time, so I'll have to conclude. Thank you very much, Mr. Fahad, Mr. Shailendra Singh, and Mr. Nasir for being with us in the debate today, and of course, Faisal for joining us in the studio as well. Thank you so much for watching the debate. I'll see you tomorrow at 7.